and welcome to the Fundamentals of Lute Playing. My name is Laudon Schuett, and today we're going to be talking about accent-based fingerings. You can think of this as a companion video to the second piece that you're learning, the Green Sleeves treble. Accent-based fingerings are a very, very interesting topic, and I think that it can be a little bit controversial, especially for people who've come from the classical guitar world. I think that's less so today. Maybe it was more of an issue 10, 15, 20 years ago. I think a lot of people are hip to some of these historical fingering systems. For the absolute beginner, this may mean nothing to you. This is not controversial. It's just me telling you, well, how do we approach fingerings? So let's dive into it a little bit. Accent-based fingerings are primarily going to be involved with the right hand, but there are some ways that the left hand can have an impact on the accent of the music. If you're an absolute beginner and you don't know what I mean by accent, I'm going to explain, but I will also repost the link to the Artusi Basic Music Theory and History website so that you can brush up on your musical terms and meanings. So an accent just means that you're putting emphasis on a particular note. If I'm playing something in 4/4 and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, you can clearly hear that I am speaking more loudly and playing more loudly on 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I won't speak this time. That emphasis is an accent. And if you've taken dance, if you have had the opportunity, my wife and I did Arthur Murray some years back. We got a group on and we did Arthur Murray dance. You start to realize that the accents are often when your foot comes down on the floor. It's this visceral feeling. It's really, really wonderful. If any of you have taken dance classes, you know that. If you haven't done dance before, I highly recommend taking dance classes, especially you classical guitar players who maybe are coming from a background where the emphasis with right hand fingerings is to even things out or to make each finger equal. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But having the chance to do some dance where you're feeling the beat, where you're feeling the accents, that can be a wonderful experience. So get out there and try that out. In particular, I found doing some of the sort of ballroom dancing was very helpful, as well as some of the salsa dancing and things like that. Very, very good for developing that sense of accent and beat and rhythm. So for the 16th century musician, you'll hear the term good notes and bad notes, and good notes are the accented notes, and bad notes are the unaccented notes or the lightly played notes. Bad doesn't mean they're bad; it's just a sort of term that was used to distinguish the two notes. Now, the rules are fairly simple, and I am going to include a handout for this lesson. It will be a link to it will be in the description, and it will go over everything that I'm talking about right now, so you can review. If you're confused, you can look at that, and as always, you can put some questions in the comments. So let's start off. Let's say we're in a 4 count. We're in common time, 4/4. In general, we're going to have an accent on beat 1 and an accent on beat 3. And 2 and 4 are going to be unaccented. Now, for the more advanced musicians who are watching this, of course, there are exceptions. We have resolutions in Renaissance music that occur on the downbeat, and the resolution needs to be quiet compared or quieter than the dissonance that preceded it, than the cadence that brought us to that resolution. Hemiolas are another example. That's when the accent moves around, and you'll have a gentle landing on beat 1 in some parts of the hemiola. So this is not a firm rule that is used all the time without thought. This is something that is probably 9 or maybe 95% of the time you're going to follow this, and then there are going to be exceptions. So in 4/4, you can think of the strong being on 1 and on 3. Now, to play a strong note, in general, we're going to use our thumb. And then when the thumb is not available, when it's busy doing other things, we can use our middle finger as a replacement. If you are one of our players who's focusing on M and I alternation, then you would definitely be using your M finger a lot as the strong finger and the I as the weak finger. This would be very strange to the modern classical guitar player, where you often lead with the index finger. And sometimes I have to kind of convince people that the middle finger is stronger than the index finger. But let me give you a very, very simple demonstration. If you take your thumb and your index finger and you try to pinch, now let's have you pinch yourself. I don't want you pinching anyone else. But if you try to pinch yourself, you'll find that there's sort of a limit to what you can get out of that index finger. But if you use your middle finger, you can really, really dig in and get a strong pinch. The middle finger is longer, it's stronger. I'm not a medical doctor like my wife is, but there's probably a muscular explanation. And I think the important thing to just understand is that untrained, the middle finger will be stronger than the index. If you're a classical guitar player who's done a lot of training to make that index finger loud, you may find that you have to relax a little bit and let that kind of tone down. But you should have control over that index finger anyways. So I'll be the mean teacher and say you should be able to relax that finger even as a guitar player if needed. So something to work on. So what we're going to do is on beat 1, we're going to use our thumb. Beat 2, index. Beat 3, thumb. And beat 4, index. The difference between how much you accent one and how little you accent, or how soft 2 is going to depend on the context. It's going to depend on the music and what you're playing. But in general, the index finger is going to be playing the weak beats. Now, let's say we add in eighth notes. When we play the ands, so if I go 1 and 2 and, those ands are always going to be played by the index finger. So let's say I have a dotted quarter note and I go 1 and 2 and. So the and is going to be played by the index finger. There are some rare exceptions in the repertoire when the index finger is not available and you may need to use something else, or it's too far away from the string to realistically reach there. So sometimes in those cases what we'll do is we'll use the A finger, or we'll even use the M finger, but just be kind of light with it. That's going to depend on the context. But in general, you're going to be always playing ands, single note ands, with your index finger. If you're playing chords, if you're doing something like this, there'll be some different options that we'll talk about down the road. But for now, let's talk primarily about a single line of music. We're working on our trebles and we want to work out the accents. So let's say, though, we have a quarter note followed by a quarter note and an eighth note. So if I were to go 1 and 2 and. Now here an interesting thing happens. I've played beat 1 with my thumb. And if the second beat were a quarter note, I would normally play that with my index finger. But because the second beat now has an eighth note attached to it, that means the eighth note takes precedence. That eighth note is always going to be played with the index finger. So it means the note before it needs to be played with the thumb. So in that case, we go 1 and 2 and. And I will have this in the written example in the description so you can see it. Because what we don't want to end up doing is going thumb, index, index. What we see in the literature from the 16th century is that you can always repeat the thumb, but in general, they are not repeating the index finger. There are some extremely rare exceptions to that I can think of, and they almost always involve actually playing more than one note at the same time. So we're not going to worry about that right now. And I should say that there are some excellent players today who have developed using the index finger more than once in a row, and it sounds beautiful. So I suppose if you're okay with going outside of the box and you can make it sound beautiful, who am I to judge? But I will say I don't know of any sources where when playing a single line of music, you're just using your index finger. If somebody does know of one, let me know. Pop it in the comments. It's a good thing for me to know. Okay, so we've done our 1 and 2 and there we go. So that's probably the most interesting thing that occurs with eighth notes. Now, if we're playing 16th notes, something interesting happens. If we go 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and you'll notice that I'm going thumb on 1, index on E, and thumb on and index on And what we soon realize is that even though we were always using our index finger on the ands in the context of eighth notes and quarter notes, once we reach the 16th note level, that index finger is going to be reserved for the E's and the A's, the lightest of the notes. So you can think of it as being this sort of hierarchy, which is that when the new set of faster notes, like 16th notes, is added, the weak portion of that is going to get the index finger. That always is going to that's always going to win out against the more accented note. So if we take a beat that is broken into 16th notes, like 1, E, and you can almost think of it as a faster version of 1, 2, 3, 4. You're just going strong, weak. So you're going 1, E, and and that can be a little funny at first. You'll have to get used to that, and it follows the same rules that we just talked about with the quarter note mixed with the eighth note. If, for example, we play an eighth note mixed with two 16th notes, we go 1 E and Here again we go thumb and then thumb index. So 1 E and And I will, again, I'll put an example in the little sheet that I'm putting in the description, so all of you can look at that. And if you're having trouble seeing what I'm doing, you can see it in writing. And as a reminder, if you're doing this with middle finger and index, you can absolutely just switch out all my thumbs for middle finger. So you just go. So 1 E and that's the basic premise when you're dealing with what we call an even time, an even meter, like 4/4 or 2/4. When we get into 3 beats, so if you're in a 3 count piece, if we're going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So what we end up with is thumb on the first beat, index on the second beat, thumb on the third beat, and then we're going to repeat thumb on 1. So if we think about our rule, we can always repeat that thumb. So we're going to go strong, weak, strong, strong, weak, strong, strong, weak, strong. And you'll notice the strong on beat 3 is a little less strong than on beat 1. If any of you have ever danced the waltz, you go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and you can feel that. I think that's very, very helpful. And we have Renaissance dances like the Galliard, we have the courant, we have jigs, we have all sorts of things that use 3 time, and it's going to have that feeling. And of course it gets a little more complicated when we throw in hemiolas and we go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we change where that accent ends up going. So keep that in mind. We will have some exceptions to what I'm talking about as well in 3. On the smaller level, dealing with 8th notes and 16th notes, it's absolutely the same rules as what I just talked about. So for example, you would go 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 1. And same rule where we go 1 E and 2 E and Now one other interesting little thing you could run into is 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and again you can repeat those thumbs. I will include a couple of interesting rhythmic examples so you can see how It's worked through. And that's based upon the fingerings we see in manuscripts and in the rules described sometimes in the opening. One great example would be the Variety of Lute Lessons by Robert Doland, where he translates a preface that was created by Bissard, and he explains the process of working out the fingerings. With the left hand, you can influence accents, and one of the major ways is something we've already talked about, which is shifting. And I did briefly mention in the shifting video that you can inadvertently create accents that you don't want when you shift. So you want to make sure that your shifts are on strong beats. What does that mean? So let me give you an example. So let's say I'm doing 1, 2, 3, 4, and I go 1, 2, 3, 4. Or you could shift with your first finger. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I made the shift on 3. Whereas if you weren't thinking in an accent-based system, you might go 1, 2, 3. Now I can still make that sound good. It is possible to still make it sound good. But I'm working a little harder. I'm making sure that I shift. Now, why is it important to shift on strong beats? When we shift, there's a sort of natural human reaction to play something loudly right after the shift. So, for example, if I weren't fighting it, I might go, and I might accidentally, and I exaggerated a little bit there, but on beat 2, I've got this big giant accent, and I think that is to be avoided. So when you're looking at your green sleeves and you're looking at some of the fingerings that I've picked here, so for example, something like, we have this shift. It goes 1, 2, and 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3. That shift, I don't know if there would be really another good option there. I mean, I suppose you could, you could maybe work something out, but that one, I think you have to do that shift that way. I'm trying to see, is there a spot where somebody might be inclined to do something a little bit different? I tried to pick things where you're kind of stuck. I don't think so. So that's good. That's good. But if somebody finds something, you'll have to let me know. I think the idea here is that if you change the fingerings that I wrote into green sleeves, just be aware of this accent shift thing. And I should clarify, just so it's absolutely clear, there are situations where you have to shift. I can think of, there's a fantasy that I'm working on right now, where you're stuck because of where your fingers are at. You have to make a shift on a weak beat, and that does happen. And what you just want to do is make sure you're aware of it. So let's say I had to go 1, 2, 3. Let's say I had to do that for some reason. You just want to make sure 1, 2, 3, 4, that you're aware of that natural tendency to add that accent when you make the shift there. And of course, what we're talking about right now is single line stuff, so it's fairly simple. And you might go, wow, it seems like there's always a way around this. It will get more complicated when we add other voices, and we will come back to this topic when it gets more complicated. We'll have to keep returning to all of these things. So that is a basic introduction to accent-based fingerings. If there's anything you walk away with from this episode, it's that the Renaissance has a fingering system that's based on a natural hierarchy in music. And you can think of it a lot of it as being centered around dance or physical movement. The weak beats are when our feet are in the air, and the strong beats are when our feet hit the ground. This is it's not to say that later views on music are wrong, it's just different. When you get to the end of the 18th century, you start to see some ideas popping up about equality, making every note even and making every note blend really well. In the Renaissance, it's more about emphasizing the beauty and the difference of the notes. And it's going to vary from piece to piece. That's going to be more it's going to be emphasized more in certain pieces than in others. I do think there are moments that are really, really beautiful when you have an even, beautiful sound. And then there are moments where it's really nice to be jagged. If you're playing a march or a really hoppy jig, you're going to have a different accent guide and articulation than you would if you're playing some very sad, lugubrious piece. So keep in mind that all of this is context. It's all about what is the piece you're looking at right now, what is the music you're looking at right now, knowing the basic system that they used. And for those of you that didn't watch the right hand video, or it's been a while, there's just a reminder that this is built out of that whole idea of the plectrum, right? The weight of the plectrum going through the string, and then the up pluck is light. So down, up, down, up, down, up. And if you look at other musical cultures around the world, if you look at oud players, if you look at sitar players, if you look at pipa players, especially if they're playing in traditional ways, this idea of accent-based playing is still strong. It's still something that is I wouldn't go so far as to say universal, but it's certainly widespread amongst musical genres and traditional music. If you look at bluegrass players with their alternate picking styles, you'll see this. If you see a lot of some electric guitar playing, now the electric guitar players have taken it to the point where they have all sorts of hybrid systems and different things, but a lot of electric guitar playing is still played with an accent system. So this is a good thing to have in your pocket. If you're planning on being primarily a lute player, then you definitely want to be comfortable with this idea. If you're a classical guitarist and you're figuring out, well, how do I deal with this in the context of a technique that I've already developed on the classical guitar, well, just think about it as a tool to add to your kit. And you can even incorporate it in your classical guitar playing to make this music sound more historically accurate on the classical guitar. If you've been playing with the index finger on accented notes and you want to start experimenting with some more accent bass, you can even go so far as to using thumb on your classical guitars. Again, I think the thumb out technique works quite well on classical guitar. So questions, please put them in the comment section. This is a big, scary topic with all sorts of nuance involved. So if you run into something in one of your pieces and you're like, oh, what would be the fingering here? I can provide for you maybe what would be the sort of traditional fingering and then some alternates to go along with it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to keep up and stay in touch with future videos and know when the next one is coming out, I think the next video I'm going to do up is a more involved discussion of warming up, and then some more historical videos to talk about how do we learn more about the pieces we're playing before we dive into our final treble piece, before we add bass lines to our playing. So if you want to keep up on that, the best thing you can do and the best thing to support the channel is just subscribe. So happy luting, practice, and I'll see you for the next video. Bye-bye.